A very good evening to you. Friday nights at this time, we usually try and get to have a conversation with a key person. And today, we're going to be focusing on the Middle East. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called on the United Nations Secretary General and the Security Council to undertake preparations for an international conference that would engage parties to the Middle East conflict in a genuine peace process. In his address to the General Assembly, Abbas accused Israel of violating agreements signed with Palestinians, including undermining the two-state solution through what he termed oppressive practices.
اتفاقات تطبيع بين إسرائيل والإمارات والبحرين.
Israel, the UAE and Bahrain have just signed normalization agreements in violation of the Arab Peace Initiative and the principles of a just and lasting solution under international law. The Palestinian Liberation Organization has never asked anyone to speak or negotiate on behalf of the Palestinian people. The only way to achieve a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in our region is to end the occupation and to ensure the independence of the State of Palestine along the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. In this regard, I call on the Secretary General of the United Nations to start preparations in cooperation with the Quartet and the Security Council for an international conference early next year that brings together all relevant parties. The conference should have full authority to launch a genuine peace process based on international law and relevant terms of reference. It should aim to end the occupation, grant the Palestinian people their freedom and independence in their own state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital, and to settle all final status issues, notably the refugee question, in line with Resolution 194.
So, as you heard there, significant developments have been taking place in the Middle East, particularly in this past week or so. And we found out, of course, that the United Arab Emirates as well as Bahrain have normalized relations with Israel. And the Palestinians are not happy with that move. The President of the United States hailed the deal as a new dawn for the Middle East. Palestine has criticized these deals as peace in the Middle East has long been predicated on the freedom of Palestine and its right to self-determine. Well, to explore this and other issues, I caught up with the Palestinian Ambassador to South Africa, Her Excellency Hanan Jara. This is how our conversation went.
We do believe that such a deal is a kind of a mirage. It's a deal on the sand that won't last for long. Our thoughts and our reaction actually about such kind of a deal is that for the first time, maybe long time ago, the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people united denounce and reject this deal. Why do we do so? Why do we react in this manner? Actually, because this deal does not only go against the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which offers Israel normal relations in the region in exchange of ending occupation, and against tens of Arab League resolutions that go on the same sense. But it also a betrayal to the simple principles of justice and freedom principles. This deal has no real impact on finding a solution to the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Resolving it, in fact, is less likely to happen now that normalization of relations with Arab countries is no longer predicated on recognizing Palestinian rights.
So would you say that recognizing Israel is not recognizing Palestine, or can countries recognize both entities?
Well, of course, they can recognize both entities, but at the right moment and in the right context. We do believe that Arab countries and our friends and Arabs can protect their interests in the region against the regional threats and against the international hegemonic powers, of course. But also, it's not on the expense of the Palestinian people's rights in self-determination and in independence. We do believe that all Arab countries have the right to issue an agreement with Israel. But as I mentioned before, according to certain principles, one of them and the most important of them is the Arab Peace Initiative, which gives the Arab countries the right and the legitimacy to have or to issue relations with Israel, but after solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
All right. Do you think that more Arab nations might follow the UAE and Bahrain?
Well, as we witnessed, obviously the coming few days will witness more. Hopefully, we will not witness such a move, but taking into consideration, as I mentioned before, the context and the timing and the race to the Trump's election and propaganda towards the White House again, obviously this might lead to other Arab countries to follow. Hopefully not, and we work hard not to follow such a step and to become a trend, but we can't predict.
All right, so what do you think this drive by President Trump is? Is it about Iran or is it about Israel and Palestine?
Well, it's about the region, I do believe. Iran and Israel and Palestine are parts of the region and they are dynamics. But the most dynamic thing in the region is Palestine. This whole crisis in the region, which is not new, which has been for ages, it's because the political problem for Palestine is not solved. And such kind of deals and such dynamics will not bring peace to the region until the Palestinian people gain their rights, their inalienable rights to self-determination and independence, and in having their own independent state.
What kind of relationship does Palestine enjoy with Iran?
Well, Palestine has good relations with Iran, as our relations with any other country in the region. We have diplomatic relations a long time ago, since the 70s maybe, and we have an embassy there, a full-fledged embassy, and we have an ambassador, and our ambassador is the dean of the diplomatic corps there. But as any other bilateral relation, we might agree and we might not agree on certain matters. So we can say that it's a normal diplomatic and political bilateral relationship between the two countries.
You don't think that this relationship with Iran has come at a cost to you as Palestine, because Iran is enemy number one for the United States?
As I mentioned to you, maybe this relation with the U.S. is true as you describe it, but this really doesn't have that impact on the Palestinians. No, on the contrary. I mean, in the past, Iran was in good terms with the U.S. administration, and they issue a nuclear agreement on that sense with Barack Obama. So things only changed during the Trump administration, and it affects only more even the Palestinian cause, because the Trump administration was the one who really did the most irreversible actions against the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. Because of such administration and because of the strong relations with Netanyahu and because of the right-wing trends now going all over the world with the lead of the US, we can see that the Palestinian people are now threatened. We face as Palestinian an existential threat, and a threat not only to the Palestinian government, not only to the Palestinian political factions or to the Palestine Liberation Organization. No, we face a real existential threat that targets our national identity and our existence as a nation. And this has nothing to do with Iran, of course. This has to do with Palestine and Israel. This is the core of the tension in the region. Without solving this issue of the Palestinian people, the region will not witness peace and stability. And we do believe that everyone around the world knows this.
All right. So, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu was at pains to say this is a historic moment for peace. And from what I'm hearing from you is that he's either being deliberately ignorant or he's pretending. Can any kind of movement towards peace come from what's happening?
No, of course not. This is only a mirage and delusion. And let's say it's a mirage and delusion for the people who are doing it. I mean, unfortunately for the Arab governments who are dealing with this issue as Benjamin Netanyahu really pictured it. But for the Israelis, they know that this is a mirage, and they know that the only tangible and authentic path to real and sustainable peace is the one that obliged the Israelis to realize the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people in self-determination and independence. Israel should be brought to live side by side in peace and security with all other neighbors countries on the basis of equal sovereignty. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims that he has proven that Israel can have peace for peace due to this such kind of agreements without ending the occupation. No, this is an illusion. The Palestinian people will never accept Israel's plan for eternal colonization, oppression, and injustice. We do believe that real peace will only come if the Palestinian people have justice and freedom. Without justice, there can never be peace.
What do you think is in it for Israel trying to normalize relations with the Arab nations in the region?
For Israel, as Benjamin Netanyahu says, that he can achieve peace for peace without even have to abandon a 1 centimeter of land, because the whole thing about making peace with Israel, according to the international resolutions, UN Charter, and Arab Peace Initiative, was land for peace. Israel would give us the land, and we give Israelis the peace. Now, with having such kind of agreements in such moment, in such context, without Israel have to give up any kind of reconciliation or any kind of land for making peace with Arabs, it makes the whole Arab initiative out of track, and it shows that Benjamin Netanyahu is the one who is the strong, who can achieve everything that he wants without giving up any piece of land for the sake of peace. Of course, this won't be the right path, because peace is not only about signing agreement. Peace is a vision and an act of courageous people who can really right the wrong and who can appreciate the mutual interest for both peoples.
All right, so we know that America's relationship with Israel is complicated for any president who's in power, some of it more enthusiastic than others. Do you think that things might change if Joe Biden is elected president, or are you expecting more of the same from America?
Well, let's try not to predict, first of all, who will be winning, because it's still unclear. And actually, 2020 is an unpredictable year by all means. But what we can say that at least for Joe Biden won't be able or won't go extreme as the Donald Trump administration did. They won't do irreversible actions that might come or step on the Palestinians' rights to self-determination. And at least they would still give a chance for the two-state solution to become on the table. And as we noticed during the statements, either from Joe Biden or from the Vice President Kamala Harris, the only tangible way is through direct negotiations between the two parties. And we do believe that this might be a better situation, let's say. But as I told you, we cannot predict because it's unclear. There's nothing clear up to now.
Do you think that Palestine needs to change strategy? We're seeing this shifting with the Arab world, and as you're saying, that it's their choice to normalize relations who they feel like. But we always had a sense that the Arab world would work hard for you to see a Palestinian state. Do you think that there's still the same amount of energy, and that maybe you need to think about another way to get to your end goal?
Well, to be honest, and everyone around the world knows that the Palestinians are pragmatic enough to decide their interest at the right moment and to deal with the right people. We don't want to go extreme and say that we need to make a shift, but we were courageous enough just yesterday to announce that we will not be handling the presidency of the Arab League this year, though it's our term, because we were not satisfied and we were not happy with what happened in the Arab League in the past 2 weeks, because they refused to denounce or to reject the normalization agreement. This is not the first time that the Palestinians face the same situation. We have been facing this even before the establishment of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And we were pragmatic enough to sit and to unify ourselves and the political factions and to discuss our options and to take the right decision for the sake of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. And to be honest, also, we don't want to really say that we need to change, because when we talk about Arab countries, we talk about our families, we talk about our friends, we talk about our brothers and neighbors. And many of the Arab people really were angry and upset of the normalization agreements. And especially in Bahrain, many of the civil society organizations and groups and bloggers and influencers were openly against such kind of normalization in the right moment. So we always will rely on our on the Arab people, on our neighbors, and on our friends from all over the world to support the Palestinian people. We outlived many aggressions and many sellouts against the Palestinian people, and we'll outlive this one also.
All right. So what does it mean in terms of, things like the Oslo Accords and other commitments that you've made? Are you going to re-look this as you move forward?
Well, we already did, because unfortunately, Oslo is still the only path that is agreed upon by the international community as a mean to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, of course. But we agree on this, and we respect this. Actually, it's the Israelis who denounce everything that has related to Oslo. And on the other hand, despite that, it was very hard for us to stay committed to the Oslo Agreement and the agreements that came as a result of it. But we stopped lately because it comes on the expense of the Palestinian people dignity, actually. But what I can say is that the Palestinian leadership has completely boycotted the current U.S. administration because of its bias towards the Israeli settler colonial regime. We are saddened that the U.S. has thrown more than 25 years of political and diplomatic efforts down the drain by undermining its blockade role for the peace in the Middle East and taking the wrong side of history. We do believe that the international community has the responsibility to bring Israeli violations of the international order, peace and security to an end. We hope that key international players will be able to fill up the gap that U.S. has left by completely turning its back to the Palestinian justice cause and aspirations.
You talk about the international community. I wonder, do you think that the Palestinian issue is enough of an agenda item at these discussions? I mean, the United Nations General Assembly is in play, 75th session. Do you think that Palestine is getting the attention that it deserves, or could more be being done?
Well, of course, there is always more that can be done, but I can assure you that the Palestinian item is still on the agenda of almost all peace-loving nations and governments. It was just yesterday that South Africa, through President Cyril Ramaphosa, that delivered their speech to the UN General Assembly, and Palestine was present. So if in South Africa's speech Palestine was present, I assure you that it will be present in many other speeches and agendas. Actually, this kind of normalization agreement and the pressure that exerted by the U.S. administration, let's say the Trump's administration and the Netanyahu administration on countries and on states pushing for normalization is a double-edged sword. On the contrary, some other countries follow, and on the other hand, many countries around the world are giving phone calls to President Mahmoud Abbas and to the Palestinian leadership, supporting them and offering a hand to support the Palestinian right and to support Palestinians in such a difficult time. This is what we rely on, actually.
All right, so a lot of events taking place around you, outside your country. What do you think needs to happen to get a peace process back on track?
Well, actually, we need to bring friends of Palestine together on board and to try maybe to find a formula that of interest of the international community again, or by reviving the Oslo Accord or bringing the two parties into the negotiation table again. Hopefully, the U.S. elections will produce a more progressive government, let's say, and we count on our friends like the Quartet, the South Africa and the African countries in Latin America. We are discussing many options right now in this regard, taking into consideration another important development that now is taking place, which is the Palestinian reconciliation among Fatah and Hamas, and trying to reach a kind of an agreement that would lead to a consolidated Palestinian front internally, so that then we can find allies and friends internationally that can support the Palestinian cause.
or perhaps as we start to wrap up this conversation, just remind us what life is like for the average Palestinian inside Palestine, and also how difficult it is managing the Jerusalem question.
Thank you for asking this, actually, because now, while we are under the pressure of the coronavirus pandemic now, and in Palestine the numbers are even now getting higher in what we call a second wave, taking into consideration that the situation is not normal originally. The Jerusalem issue is something on top of our agenda, but unfortunately the numbers are getting even higher because Israel is neglecting Palestinians, denying their access to health facilities, no kits to test, especially Palestinians in Jerusalem. You might know Jerusalem is a mixed city. There are Palestinians, Muslims and Christians living there, and there are Jews. The Jews enjoy all the facilities needed for health care, and accessibility, travel movement, freedom of movement, while the Palestinians are denied all of this. So it brings the situation in Palestine now, especially in Jerusalem, brings to our attention and to your attention the situation that used to be during the apartheid era here in South Africa. The Palestinian people in cities are suffocating in small bantustans with no access to some of the roads, because some of the roads are for the use of the Israeli settlers. The settlements, our land is grabbed on a daily basis for the sake of the settlement enterprise, which is expanding on a daily basis, and we're still living under the threat of annexation. The annexation of the big Israeli settlement blocks located in the area allocated for the Palestinian state, unfortunately. The situation in Palestine is very tough on a daily basis. Of course, there is a kind of a difficult and tough financial crisis, because we have boycotted relations with Israel. We stopped the security coordination since April. Accordingly, since April, we can't get our tax revenues from the Israeli part. These tax revenues cover the running cost of the Palestinian government, including my salary and the salary of the civil employees and even the security forces. So you can imagine the difficulties and the problems that the Palestinian citizen is facing. No money, no salaries since April. The pandemic is in a difficult situation. The health care facilities are suffering because of the lockdown that started in Palestine since March, and it lasted for 3 months. In addition to all these challenges, and while the international community is standing in solidarity to combat the violence and its effects on the civilians, Israel was busy on another track, hitting records for arresting Palestinian people, putting them in the jails, demolishing their houses, suffocating them. Of course, we should not forget, and we always should highlight the situation in Gaza, because Gaza has been under blockade by Israel since 13 consecutive years, with 3 or 4 consecutive wars on the area. And now Gaza is like the rest of the Palestinian territory, is also suffering from the coronavirus, with, of course, limited access to electricity and to potable water and etc. So you can imagine the difficulties. It's even not apartheid. We can say that it's even more difficult and more harsh than apartheid itself.
All right, so that was the conversation that I had with Her Excellency, the Palestinian Ambassador to South Africa, Hanan Jara. All right, we'll be back.